Chapter 20 of Audrey Craven by May Sinclair. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 20. From that afternoon Wyndham kept away from Chelsea Gardens. In fact, he had left town. To do him justice, he honestly thought he was doing the cleverest thing for Audrey in leaving her, to think. It would have been the cleverest thing if he could have kept away altogether, but as long as she had the certainty of his return, it was about the stupidest. If he had stayed, they would have resumed their ordinary relations. All might have blown over like a mood, and whatever he knew about her, Audrey herself would never have known it. As it was, he had emphasized the situation by going. And what was more, he had thrown Audrey back on her uninteresting self, the very worst company she could have had at present. She had been used to seeing him almost daily through a whole winter. He had made her dependent on his society for all her interests and pleasures, and when she was suddenly deprived of it, instead of being able to think, she spent her time in miserable longing. She could not think and feel at the same time. Feeling such as hers was incompatible with any form of thinking. It was feeling in a vacuum, the most dangerous kind of all. The emptiness of her life, now that Wyndham was gone, made her say to herself that she could bear anything but that. It made her realize what the years, the long unspeakable years, would be like when she had given him up. She looked behind and around her, and there were the gray levels of ordinary existence. She looked below her, and there was the deep. She was going into the darkness of it, swiftly, helplessly, blown on by the wind of vanity. She saw no darkness for the light before her, a nebulous light, but it dazzled her like the sun shining through a fog. Once, at the fiercest point of her temptation, she felt an impulse to confession, that mysterious instinct which lies somewhere at the heart of all humanity. She had wild thoughts of going to Katherine and telling her all, asking her what she ought to do. Katherine was large minded, she would not blame her much. Perhaps she would tell her she ought not to give Wyndham up, that she ought to think of him, to be ready to sacrifice the world for his sake. Yes, Katherine was so clever, she would be a good judge, and Audrey would abide by her judgment. Unhappily, when it came to the point, she was afraid of her judgment. She had always been a little afraid of Katherine. Once she even thought of going to Mr. Flaxman Reed, that holy anachronism, as she had once heard Wyndham call him. But his judgment was a foregone conclusion. Mr. Flaxman Reed was not large-minded. Once, too, a gleam of reason came to her. She loved dearly the admiration and good opinion of her world, and she reflected that the step she contemplated meant no congratulations, no wedding dress, no presents, and no callers. Wedding, indeed! As she had read of a similar case in London legends, it would be a social funeral with no flowers by request. But these considerations had no weight after an evening spent with Cousin Bella. And though she played on her piano till the lace butterflies on Miss Craven's cap fluttered again (why would Cousin Bella wear caps in defiance of the fashion?), it was no good. If she had had a fine voice she would have sung at the top of it. Failing that medium of expression, she longed to put her fingers in her own ears and scream into Cousin Bella's. And as they yawned in each other's faces, and she realized that something like this might be the programme for an indefinite time, she remembered how Langley had called her a metaphysician and a moral philosopher. It was on statements like these, apparently borne out by the fact of his friendship, that she based the flattering fiction of her own intellectuality. Without that fiction Audrey could not have supported life in the rare atmosphere she had accustomed herself to breathe. The conclusion of it all was that, come what might come, she could not give Langley up. One afternoon she crossed the river for a walk in Battersea Park. It was a warm spring, and down the long avenue the trees were tipped with the flame of bursting buds, like so many green lights turned low. The beds and borders were gay with crocuses and hyacinths, and the open spaces were beginning to look green again. Audrey cared little for these things, but today she was somehow aware of them. She felt in her the new life of the spring as she had felt it a year ago. She walked rapidly from sheer excitement till she had tired herself out. Then she sat down on one of the benches overlooking the waste ground where the children played. Except for a bright fringe under the iron railings, it was still untouched by spring, and the sallow grass had long been trodden into the dust. Some ragged little cricketers were shouting not far off, and near her, by the railings, was a family group, a young father and mother with their children from 2 years old and upwards, crawling around them. They were enjoying a picnic tea in the sunshine, with the voluptuous carelessness of outward show that marks the children of the people. Audrey looked at it all with a faint disgust, but she was too tired to move on to a more cheerful spot. She turned her back on the picnic party and began to think about Wyndham. He had been away 10 days. He said he was going for a fortnight. In another week, at the longest, she would see him. She was roused by a tug at her petticoats. The 2-year-old, attracted like some wild animal by her stillness, had scrambled through the railings and was trying to pull its fat little body up by one hand on to the bench beside her. Its other hand grasped firmly a sheaf of fresh grass. It was clean and pretty, and something in its baby face sent a pang to Audrey's heart. She loosened its chubby fingers, hoping it would toddle away, but it gave a wilful chuckle, and stood still, staring at her, reproaching, accusing, in the unconscious cruelty of its innocence. And yet surely the divine charity had chosen the tenderest and most delicate means of stirring into life her unborn conscience. Moved by who knows what better impulse, she stooped suddenly down and touched its face with the tips of her gloved fingers. Startled at the strange caress, like some animal stroked too lightly, the little thing made its face swelled and asserted its humanity by a howl. Then it fled from her with a passionate waddle, scattering blades of grass behind it as it went. Even so do we chase away from us the ministers of grace. She leaned back, overcome by a sort of moral exhaustion. Her self-love was hurt, as it would have been if a dog had shrunk from her advances. For Audrey was not accustomed to have her favours rejected. She was further irritated by the ostentatious affection of the child's mother, as she helped it through the railings with shrill cries of "There then, Blossoms! Did she then, the naughty lady?" And when baby echoed "Naughty lady," it was as if the 2-year-old had judged her. She sat a little while longer and then went away. As she rose she looked sadly back at the family group. The man was lying on his back and letting the children walk about on the top of him. Baby had found peace in sucking an orange and stamping on her father's waist. The woman was strewing paper bags and orange peel around her in a fine disorder, while she thriftily packed the remains of their meal in a basket. Audrey shuddered. Their arrangements were all so ugly and unpleasant. And yet they were married, they were respectable, they were happy, these terrible people, while she was miserable. She had no sense of justice, and she rebelled against the policy of nature, who leaves her coarser children free, and levies her taxes on the aristocracy of feeling. The sordid domesticity of the scene had glorified by contrast her own dramatic mood. Poor Audrey. She hated vulgarity, and yet she was trying to lay hold on the great things of life through the vulgarest of all life's tragedies. Langley would be in town again in a week. He would ask if she had made up her mind, and she knew now too well the answer she would give him. But Langley was not in town again in a week, nor yet in a fortnight. And when at the end of 6 weeks he did come back, he came back married to Miss Alison Fraser. Nobody ever knew how that came about. Miss Gladys Armstrong, who may be considered an authority, maintained that as Wyndham had the pride which is supposed to be the peculiar property of the Evil One, he could never have proposed to the same woman twice. Consequently Miss Fraser must have proposed to him. Perhaps she had. There are ways of doing these things, and whatever Alison Fraser did, she did gracefully. As for her private conscience, in refusing him with conscious magnanimity, she had done no good to anybody, not even herself. In marrying him finally she had saved the situation without knowing that there was a situation to be saved. The news threw Audrey into what she imagined to be the beginning of a brain fever, but which proved to be a state of nervous collapse lasting with some intermissions for a fortnight. At the end of that time, whether it was that she was so fickle a creature that even fate could make no abiding impression on her, or that she was no longer burdened with the decision of a momentous question, to all appearances she recovered; so much so that when some one sent her an invitation to the private view at the New Gallery, she put on her best clothes, not without a pang, and went. Alas! The place was full of associations, melancholy with the sheeted ghosts of the past. This time last year she had been to the private view with Ted. They had amused themselves with laughing at the pictures, and wondering how long it would be before one of his would be hanging there. And as she listlessly turned the pages of her catalogue, the first names that caught her attention were Haviland Catherine, 232; Haviland Edward, 296. She turned back the pages hastily to number 232 and read The Witch of Atlas. That picture she knew. Number 296 gave her Sappho, a study of a head. Of a head? Whose head? She found the picture, not exactly in the place of honour, but agreeably well hung and with a small crowd before it, and recognized Katherine's striking profile, raised in the attitude of a suppliant who implores, the cloud of her dark hair flaming into bronze against a sunset sky. Ted was rather too fond of that trick, but the study was not a mere vulgar success. He had achieved expression in it. It was marked "Sold." There were some lines of verse on the square panel at the base of the frame. Ted could not have afforded such a setting for his picture, but the frame was contributed by Mr. Percival Knowles, the purchaser of the canvas. The same gentleman was also the author of the verse, specially written for the portrait. Knowles, by the by, was an occasional poet; that is to say, he could burst into poetry occasionally. And Audrey read "O Aphrodite, queen of dread desire, by all the dreams that throng love's golden ways, by all the honeyed vows thy votary pays, by sacrificial wine and holy fire. Thou who hast made my heart thy living lyre, hast thou no gift for me, nor any grace? Why hast thou turned the light of love's sweet face from me, the sweetest singer of love's choir? For songs that charm the long ambrosial years, the gods bring many gifts, and mine shall be Immortal life in mortal agony, vain longing fanned by winged hopes and fears to inextinguishable flame, and tears bitter as death, salt as the Lesbian sea." Her breast rose and fell with the lines. By this time she was educated up to their feeling. "Who was Sappho, and what did she do? I know, but I've forgotten," asked a voice in the crowd. "Oh, the woman who threw herself at the other fellow's head, you know, who naturally didn't appreciate the compliment." Audrey was not intelligent enough to refrain from the inward comment, "How singularly inappropriate! I should have said Katherine was about the last person in the world to..." She turned round and found herself face to face with the poet. Knowles had been wandering through the crowd with evasive eyes, successfully dodging the ladies of his acquaintance, while his air of abstraction took all quality of offence from the unerring precision of his movements. But when he saw Miss Craven he stopped. He had an inkling of the truth, and respected her feelings too much to slight her while Wyndham's marriage was still a topic of the hour. "Not bad for the boy, that," said he, smiling gently at Sappho. "He's coming out, isn't he?" "So are you, I think. In a new line, too." Not quite a new one. I've been taken that way before." She was about to make some pretty speech when they were joined by Ted, who had not noticed Audrey. His forehead puckered slightly when he saw her, but that was no doubt from sympathy with her probable embarrassment. For the first time in their acquaintance he was indifferent to the touch of the small hand that had tried to mould his destiny. If the truth must be told, in the flush of his success Ted had found out that his passion for Audrey was only the flickering of the flame on the altar dedicated to eternal art. He listened to her compliments without that sense of apotheosis which, however low he rated it, her criticism had been wont to produce. "Don't let's be seen looking at it any longer," he said at last. "Let's go and pretend to get excited about some other fellow's work." So they left Audrey to herself. She turned back and went down the room to see the Witch of Atlas, the lady robed in her subtle veil of starbeams and mist. Her view of this picture was somewhat obstructed by a stout gentleman, who, together with a thin lady, was taking up the whole of the available space before it. His companion, a badly dressed young woman with a double eyeglass, was trying to decipher the lines quoted in her catalogue. As Audrey paused she looked up and stared, as only a woman with a double eyeglass can stare, at the same time attracting the stout gentleman's attention by a movement of her elbow. "Look, uncle, quick, that's her. That's the person." "What's that, Nettie?" The stout gentleman swung round, as if on a pivot, as Audrey moved gracefully by. "You don't mean to say so! Where's Ted?" She walked on through the rooms, depressed by the meeting with Knowles. It suggested Wyndham. She would be meeting him next. And indeed she met him in the first gallery, where her aimless wanderings had brought her again. His wife was with him. Audrey knew that she must meet her some time, and she had expected to see in Alison Fraser an enlarged edition of herself. She had even feared an édition de luxe, which would have been intolerable. She was prepared for distinction, but she saw with a finer agony the slight figure, the sweet proud face with its setting of pale gold hair, and worse than all, the indefinable air of remoteness and reserve which made Mrs. Langley Wyndham more than a distinguished woman. Wyndham lifted his hat and would have passed on, but Audrey, to show her perfect self possession, stopped and held out her hand. He felt it trembling as he took it in a preoccupied manner, and Mrs. Langley Wyndham became instantly absorbed in picture number one. "Have you seen young Haviland's performance?" asked Wyndham. He had to say something. "Yes, it's a very fine study." "So Knowles tells me. But everything's a fine study in this collection. There ought to be a fine for the abuse of that expression." "But it really is. Go and see for yourself." "It's his sister, isn't it?" "Yes." "Ah, that accounts for it. He could give his mind to it in that case." Wyndham was surprised at his own fatuity. His remarks sounded like the weird inanities that pass for witticisms in dreams. "Perhaps. But never mind Mr. Haviland. I want you to introduce me to your wife." Wyndham looked round. His wife had turned an unconscious back. "Oh, thank you. You're very kind. But we're just going." He had not meant them so, but his words were like a whip laid across Audrey's shoulders. He moved on, and his wife joined him. Audrey came across them half an hour later, stooping over some design in black and white. She saw Mrs. Langley Wyndham look up in her husband's face with a smile, raising her golden eyebrows. The look was one of those intimate trifles that have no meaning beyond the two persons concerned in it. For Audrey, smarting from Wyndham's insult, it was the flick of the lash in her face. End of chapter 20. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine.